everybody, and welcome to my show, my new show. And I'm here with Mr. Kane, my French teacher at Shepherd Hill. Hello, Mr. Kane.
How are you doing?
Now, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So, when you were younger, 6, 7, 8, and someone asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, I'm assuming your response wasn't always a French teacher.
Not at all. Nope.
What was that?
When I first, if I think back, my first thing was I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to paint and do fun, creative things. And I realized, I think, pretty quickly that that wasn't going to sustain me.
Yeah.
And then, like, as I got a little older, like 10 or 11, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian.
Oh.
I used to check all the books in the library out, because of course at that time we didn't have online things.
Yes.
I used to check all the books out on animals and every little thing, and I used to love going to the zoo and all sorts of stuff, still do. But yeah, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian.
So, that is very different from a French teacher.
Absolutely.
So, can you explain to me and everyone else how you got to be a French teacher, or how that happened, how that became to be?
Well, as I got older into high school, I actually thought I wanted to go into law or international relations. So I went to George Washington University my first year of college, and I was in the international relations program, and there were hundreds of us. And I realized pretty quickly that all of us were not going to be the next Secretary of State, and that we were going to be just part of a machine of foreign service and whatever. So I wasn't terribly happy at the school because of how large it was. You know, my largest class was 400 kids, and my chemistry class was 400 kids.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to Assumption in Worcester after a year and saying, okay, what do I really want to do? Okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And then, of course, languages. And I said, well, let's try the teaching thing for a little bit. It seems kind of natural, so that's what I did.
Okay, well, you're a French teacher, and you're very fluent in that. So going on to my next question is, how did you become so fluent in this language, strong enough to teach all these high schoolers?
Well, I had French 1 as a freshman in high school. I had an exploratory 8th grade program, but French 1. And I, in my infinite wisdom, decided that the first semester of my sophomore year of high school, I was going to be an exchange student. And I went and for 6 months lived in Nice, France. That's right on the Riviera.
Amazing.
And I went to a French high school. I look back on it now and think, what was I thinking? Because I had French 1. I mean, I basically could say hello and my name is, and I dropped myself baptism by fire into France and a French-speaking high school. So, and of course it was even better because when I got there, they put me in higher level classes than I really should have been because of what I needed to take. So I was taking physics and chemistry in French. And then I had to take a French class. Like you take your English class. So I was in there studying real French literature and symbolism and all this, you know, very technical stuff, which certainly wasn't what I would have been learning in my French 2 class when back home. The only joke was the idea that I had to take an English class because I had to keep up with what I would be taking back home. So I had to take an English class, which...
Pass that with flying colors.
Well, you would think so, but I had a British French teacher, or a British English teacher.
I see.
And was reminded almost on a daily basis that I did not speak English. I spoke American. And we butt heads frequently because, you know, British English is very different than American English, and he reminded me of that frequently. One of the most influential days of my life was actually that first day of school in France. I have never been more mentally exhausted in my life.
I could never imagine,
having gone through a day of French high school, just trying to take it all in.
How were your days in the high school? How did they look like compared to like the
Yeah,
U.S.?
compared to the U.S., they're totally different.
Totally.
Basically, the French high school system is set up like almost like our college system is.
Oh.
So we had an open campus. You went to, you had certain classes Monday, Wednesday,
Yeah.
Friday, certain classes Tuesday, Thursday. Maybe you had a class at 8 o'clock in the morning, from 8 to 9:15, and then maybe not again until 11. And between 12 and 2, everybody goes home for lunch, for the most part.
Oh.
So it's 2 hours for lunch as opposed to our 21 minutes.
Our 21 minutes.
And you can get used to that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But you're in school until about 5 o'clock in the evening because there's
Oh, 'cause
really
of
no after-school activities, that sort of stuff. You can do club sports and stuff, but you're in class pretty significantly in the afternoon / evening. And I had a half day on Wednesdays, so I didn't have classes in the afternoon, but I also had a half day on Saturday mornings.
Saturdays too.
Yeah, Saturday mornings.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
College experience in high school. Almost
Yes,
similar.
yes. It was great though. I mean,
Yeah, it sounds wonderful.
and you're very tracked in the French high school system, where you pick a track as soon as you get into high school.
Oh.
I was in the science track for whatever reason, and so that's why I ended up with physics and chemistry.
Oh, I see.
But they're the humanities tracks and whatever. And again, I still had to take like gym, which is not the gym that we're used to in the United States. It was basically physical education. I'll never forget having to take like gymnastics. I had to learn how to do the pommel horse and the rings and everything, and it was like the most horrifying thing.
Oh my goodness.
Because that stuff takes a lot of
Yeah.
strength to
Yeah,
do.
100%.
And everybody else was perfectly like used to doing it, and I was
Yeah.
like, "But we're
But
supposed to
you're
be
new.
playing kickball, and
Gym
gym
things.
class."
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a little interesting experience.
Well, that's an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Going to French. Wow.
And
That's
then I came
beautiful.
home, and of course it was they struggled to figure out where to put me,
Yeah, because
and unfortunately they wouldn't let me jump like levels.
Yeah,
So
I
I ended
understand.
up back in French 3, or French 2, excuse me, where I was already, and that's why sometimes some of the things I teach come a little naturally to me, because when I was there, I learned everything in reverse.
oh, okay.
I learned what was natural, and I knew, okay, this is the way my friends were speaking, so this is what I was saying.
Yeah.
And then when I got back to the U.S., I learned what these things were.
Oh, I see what you mean. So you kind of adapted.
Like, I
to
already
it
knew the
more?
imperfect
Yeah.
before I knew what it was.
Oh,
I just
see,
knew
yeah.
that the sounds coming out of my mouth were correct. And then I came home and it was like, oh, that's what I've been using. So these difficulties that normal language speakers struggle with, I wasn't struggling with them because I learned them in reverse. So I learned them naturally first and then learned the rules.
Okay.
So it's,
So wow.
yeah.
Well, that's amazing. That's super cool actually. Well, so you said you started learning French the first year of freshman year.
Yes.
And so did I. But my question to you is, what do you think is different from a French-speaking student and a Spanish-speaking student? Like, what do you think attracts them more to speaking French rather than Spanish?
Well, the problem with our society is actually, I mean, French used to be the most popular language to take for decades, in fact, for centuries, because French was the primary language of communication for business, for international affairs.
Yep.
Until probably the past maybe 15 or 20 years, where Spanish has really started to take over. And my thing with that is, it really is about language,
Yep.
not about which language you take.
Okay.
Because for me, learning a language is also learning culture. It's
Very
learning how to
true.
look at the world differently. It's learning how to understand that the world doesn't exist just as the United States. It goes far and beyond that. And yeah, you're going to use Spanish, but you're going to use Spanish, you're going to use French. But most Americans take language And one of their favorite things to tell a language teacher is, I took 4 years of whatever language and I can't speak a word.
Yeah.
Well, you can't speak a word because you haven't spoken it in 20 years. So,
Very true.
you know, if you stop speaking English and whatever, you'd forget English.
Yeah.
So anything you don't practice just sort of fossilizes
Yep.
and goes away. So it's not about the language. You know, I remember I used to teach a K through 12 summer program
Yep.
in language. And we didn't have any spaces left for the little ones, the K through 3 in Spanish, but we had plenty of spaces in French.
Okay.
And one of the parents said, well, this is not useful for my child. And I said, do you really, like, at 7 years old, do you
Yeah.
really think it's about language and
Exactly.
them being able to speak to somebody versus teaching a 7-year-old that there's a world out there and that not everybody speaks English and that not everybody thinks like we do? And, you know, it's always, you know, it's always a battle with people. Well, Spanish is so much more useful. Okay, in some cases,
Yeah.
yes, but in some cases, no. I find myself, I work at a shelter in Worcester, and I find myself using Spanish all the time, but I also use my French because we have a lot of African immigrants coming in from various French-speaking countries there as well. So it's about understanding the notions that there are differences out there, and we all aren't the same.
That's what I love about your class, because I've realized over the past 2 years that you have a lot of projects too, but they're not just about language. It's like expanding on the culture,
Yeah.
which is helpful because my freshman year, you weren't here for
Yes.
Shepherd Hill, but I found it being more like really formal and hard for me to learn. But like
Okay.
with your teaching and with like learning culture and learning language, it's like cooperated in, which I find easier to learn. So, and I think a lot of my peers also believe that's
Well,
true.
and my philosophy really is maybe in 20 years you never use French again, but did you learn how to think about the world in different ways, in different perspectives?
Yes,
And
so-
understand that everybody doesn't think like we do.
Exactly.
That ultimately is the goal for me in language teaching. It's not making you a native speaker. It is, yeah, the language is great. The language is awesome. But also the levels of culture, the levels of philosophy, the levels of the way the French look at the world, which is very different than the way we look at the world. And I think sometimes we, as people from the United States,
Yep.
need to learn a little bit more about the way others look at the same thing that we do.
I agree. I agree.
So,
Yeah, so with that being said, I remember a couple weeks ago you mentioned in class how French, so I'm in French 3 right now, French 4 becoming an AP.
yeah,
So what are your thoughts on French 4? It's a possibility,
Yep.
am I right?
it is, yes.
So what are your thoughts on that? Because
Well, I'm just excited. I've taught
Excited?
AP before. AP is pretty intensive, but I like to do it in a way where, like, we sort of immerse ourselves in what we're doing. So maybe it's not just learning in the four walls. Maybe it's, hey, we're going to meet tonight at a French bistro in Boston, and it's going to be straight French.
yep.
We're going to learn the straight French. Because a lot for me is not just the AP score. I've had several experiences in the past where my students have scored okay on the exam, but have shown me their proficiency in so many better ways.
Yes.
So for example, I had a student who struggled with the exam, and the exam is a 3-hour period of one day.
It's very hard. Very
So it's a
challenging.
drop in the bucket
Yeah.
compared to what you do all year. And I brought this young woman to France with me, and we were in Paris, and the hotel mangled our reservation
Yep.
for her room only. And I didn't know at
Okay.
first. So a few hours later, I come down and they said, "Oh, you know, we're sorry about the mix-up." And I said, "Well, what mix-up? I don't
Yeah,
don't know what you're talking
yeah.
about." And she says, "Oh, well, I spoke to your student. We took care of it all, and it's all set now." And I said, "Wait a minute." So I brought her over and I said, "What happened?" So she explained to me, And I said to the receptionist, I said, "You did this. This was all in French, right?" She says, "Oh yeah, we took care of it all. Your student speaks great French." And I was like,
Oh, that's
okay,
amazing.
my theory is, I'd rather that than whatever a number is on an
Agreed.
exam.
Yep.
The same with a former student that went to BC, graduated valedictorian, struggled a little bit on the exam. Went to BC, scored so much off the charts that they didn't know where to place him.
That's
so
amazing. Yeah.
for me, it's about like becoming okay, becoming natural. And no matter what it is in language, you got to be okay with, number one, sounding funny.
Yes.
And traditionally, people from the United States are not good at that.
Yep.
Because we have to be always at the top of our game. And when you're learning a language, you're just not.
Yeah. You can't be.
And particularly in French, with the accent,
And
it takes a
everything.
while. Again, like my accent is fairly near native because I've been there and I've lived there so many times over years. It's practice constantly. Somebody said to me today, "Well, how many languages do you speak?" And I told them, and they said, "Well, all of them can't be at the same level." And I said, "No, they're not,
No.
because
Yeah.
the fact that I speak Arabic and German, I don't use those very much."
Exactly.
So
yeah.
they calcify and sort of drop out of my brain, whereas Spanish and French I'm using every day.
Practice makes perfect.
Well, exactly. So,
Yeah. That, I like that too, because when you're having this AP exam, I'm taking multiple APs and I'm nervous for them because I've been doing pretty good with every other of my courses, but with a 3-hour test, you have to recall everything you learned.
yes. Well,
So
and
it's-
another thing I did, though, was once I became certified to teach AP, I went and corrected the AP exams nationally. Because my theory was, I'm going to defeat them at their own game.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's, what can I mean, I sat there, the last time I corrected French APs, I did 3,000 speaking samples myself. That's what I did all day for 8 hours a day.
Oh my goodness.
And but that gave me a better insight into what my students needed and how I needed to teach. And there was a year, for example, we were transitioning between cassette tapes and CDs and digital recordings. So we had 3 different groups correcting.
Yeah.
And we were finding that the scores for the people on the tapes, the actual cassette tapes, were lower.
Oh.
And it was simply, what we were discovering was they were more frustrated with the lack of ease because you have to go back and forth sometimes. You listen to it, you go back to it, you go back to it again, then you're scoring it a second time and trying to figure it all out. They were more frustrated because of being on a cassette tape than I was on the CD, where I could just drag it on the computer. So that said to me, okay, we need to get rid of the cassettes
Yes.
because they need to be on CDs or digital. So it was always join them and defeat them at their own game, basically.
Yeah, and you do that all for your students.
Exactly.
That's a whole lot of effort. That's amazing, honestly, just to try to help them out.
Yeah.
Because a lot of teachers would be like, "Oh, well, that's your score. That's what
No,
you do."
I
But
don't
it's-
believe in that.
Yeah. See, that's what's great quality about you, and I think, and it really shows in class too.
Well, thank you.
So, I think that's good.
Awesome.
Well, that is all we have for today. So, thank you, Mr. Kane,
Not a problem.
and thank you everyone for listening.